All right, we are live. Dr. Kirk Parsley, welcome to the future of fitness, my friend.
Thank you. I feel welcomed, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Man, you are a smorgasbord of really cool topics. Like I was
I've
doing
never
my
been called a
research.
smorgasbord before.
Yeah, well,
Awesome.
there's a first
I'm
for
digging this
everything.
already.
Yeah, there's so many cool things to talk about, and you've been on. First of all, thank you to Rob Wolf for connecting us, and big fan of Rob and everything he's done. He's been a
Yeah.
huge value in my career. But you've been on like the Jocko podcast, man. You've been on Dr. Gabrielle Lyons.
Yeah.
You've been on my good friend Garrett Desla's The Squad Room, Power Athlete, Joe DeSena's
Yep.
podcast, Mark Devine's podcast. You've made the circuit, and you obviously have a lot of knowledge to share. And the stuff that I'd like to get into today with you is you've really obviously made a big name for yourself within the world of sleep and optimization, coming out of the
Yep.
military and special operators. There's hormones and hyperbarics, the HRT world, psychedelics, which I'm really interested in talking about on this podcast because I don't get to talk about that a lot. Maybe let's just start with this, and then we'll dive into those topics. But just give us a brief introduction to who you are, Dr.
Yeah.
Parsley, and what you do.
All right. So first of all, I'm not Dr. Parsley. I'm just Kirk. While we're on the
Okay.
podcast. That's fine with me. Yeah. So I was I grew up in sort of rural Texas. Had really no interest in school whatsoever. But I was much more into cars and girls and sports and fighting and stupid stuff like that teenage boys do. So but I come from a very sort of conservative, traditional blue collar family, and it's kind of it's sort of the unspoken, but it's just kind of assumed that if you can serve the military, you should, and and so I always just assumed I would do that at some point. And like I said, terrible student. 4 years of high school, I was still a sophomore, but I was a good athlete, and specifically didn't translate over to SEAL training as well as I'd hoped, but I was specifically a good power athlete. I was a good speed and power athlete. And I did, multiple sports in high school and martial arts and all that stuff. And then, some documentary came out. It's kind of like that show 60 Minutes, like it was like a journalism documentary, kind of news documentary thing. It's called 48 Hours. I don't know if you remember that. It was on the air for about 10 years or something, maybe, but they had just covered SEAL training, and it was the toughest training in the world. I didn't even know what a SEAL was. And I was like, because back in those days, nobody knew what SEALs were. They didn't have the celebrity status they have now. And I watched that video about 20 times in probably 10 days. And then I went down to the Navy recruiter and said, I want to be a SEAL. And so they said, well, we don't really know how to do that, but come back next week and we'll have a plan to like figure out how to get you into SEAL training. And so that's what I did. Dropped out of high school. I joined at 17. I left after my 18th birthday. And obviously made it through SEAL training, became a SEAL. I remember very clearly at the end of BUDS, which is basic training for SEALs, them walking us around from team to team. Obviously just the West Coast teams, there are East Coast teams and West Coast teams. They walked us around from team to team, just like, hey, and here's your dream sheet. Well, like, which team do you want to go to? And it was at that moment that I realized I don't even know what a SEAL is. Like, I don't know. Like, I signed up to go through BUDS. Like, I don't know the difference between this. So, me and a bunch of my buddies are like, well, we already live here. Let's just apply for the West Coast teams, and unfortunately, almost everybody in my class went to the East Coast, and a few of us stayed on the West Coast. Anyway, I did my time in the teams. It was pre 9/11, so there's a lot of training trips and a lot of training other people's military and some kind of limited police work stuff around the world. And just decided it's time to move on, do something different. Got married, went, started college and all this. And I thought, obviously a high school dropout, like I didn't have great expectations for what I was going to do academically. I just, was going to do something academically. Like just going to college was going to be like a huge step up in my family. So I thought maybe it'd be a physical therapist. That was kind of like my moonshot, and then athletic trainer was going to be underneath that, and you need 2,000 hours of volunteer at work to apply for PT school. So I started volunteering at San Diego Sports Medicine Center to get my volunteer hours in. They hired me probably within a week, and then I worked there all through college, and worked as a PT aide and eventually a PT assistant. And decided I didn't want to be a PT anymore, but there were a bunch of young doctors there who were about my age, and they kind of talked me into going to medical school. So I go to medical school. I go to apply to medical school, and that's when I found out the military had their own medical school, which I didn't know. I didn't really have any interest in going back in the military, but I was married, I had a kid, another kid on the way. They were going to pay me instead of the other way around. I figured, all right, I'll get some time back with the SEALs, kind of give back to the community that shaped me. And, so that's what I did. Got to the SEAL teams as their doctor, really well steeped in sports medicine and orthopedics, thinking that's what I would do. And, the SEALs are a lot like professional athletes in that the worst thing you can do is put them on the bench. And so the most likely person to put them on the bench is the healthcare provider. So they just usually lie to their doctors and don't tell you what's going on because they don't want your help. And then they'll literally pay out of their pocket and go find a doctor in town to help them get through whatever they're going through so they don't get pulled out of their platoon. But because I'd been a SEAL recently enough to where there were a lot of guys at that team, at those teams on the West Coast that I trained with and deployed with, and obviously had a good enough reputation for guys to trust me. And they just kind of one by one started coming to my office and closing the door and saying, "Hey, just between us, let me tell you what's going on with me." And they were complaining, of things that are, they're relative. So, so some people would think it's comical, but like a Navy SEAL complaining that his motivation sucks is, yeah, sure, his motivation is still better than probably 90% of the country, but for him, his motivation sucks. Like he doesn't feel like doing his job. His concentration sucks. His ability to pay attention, his ability to learn, his emotional control with his family, with his friends at work, body composition shifts, like working with the nutritionist, working with the strength and conditioning coach, doing everything right and getting fatter, getting weaker, getting slower, sexual performance issues, sexual desire issues, sexual performance issues, but nothing reached the stage of disease, right? They just weren't performing as well as they would like to perform. So honestly, I was a Western trained physician, so I had no idea. I was just like, I don't know, like, I know how to recognize and diagnose and treat diseases. You don't have any disease. So, but I'll figure it out, And so I just started testing everything I could possibly test. Like literally every lab I knew how to interpret, I just tested them all. And I sent them over to the hospital. They're giving up like 17 vials of blood, 98 lab markers were coming back. And I was going through them one by one. Didn't know what I was looking for, just looking for patterns. And the pattern came back to fit their complaint. So, they would be in like the lowest quintile, or maybe lowest 10% of testosterone, IGF-1, insulin sensitivity would be crap, like their fasting blood glucose was usually under control, but their fasting insulin was usually really high relative to how fit they were. Every like oxidative markers high, inflammation, basically everything catabolic high, everything anabolic low, which doesn't fit the man in front of me, right? You look at the guy ripped, muscular, strong, virile looking. And I always joked around. I was like, hey, if I took your labs and gave them to a colleague and blocked out your birthday and asked them who you are, they'd say a 55-year-old man who's 30 pounds overweight and pre-diabetic,
Right.
And that's really what the labs would look like. And so anyway, I first started fitzing around, like, I didn't really know, but we'd all heard of like combat fatigue and shell shock and stuff in other wars. And this was 2009. So they'd been in combat for 8 years. I'm like, maybe that's it. I don't know what that is, but maybe that's it. And so I started treating for adrenal fatigue. And that was kind of when the big awareness around vitamin D3 deficiency leading to, some physiologic problems. And so I started getting guys on that. And then I'm ashamed and embarrassed to say how many guys it took me to clue in, but I don't remember, but it was a lot. I mean, it was definitely over 40, maybe up to like 100 guys that come in my office already. And I remember really clearly one time this guy saying that he took Ambien every night. And it just kind of fired off in my head. It's like I said, I'm embarrassed to say how long it took me to catch on that trend, but I was like, it kind of seems like a lot of guys said that. And so like I put a little note in the margin, and when he left, I went back through my files. Every single guy who had been in my office was taking Ambien.
No way.
And I thought, wow, I wonder if that could be a thing. Now, again, Western trained medical physician. I knew nothing about sleep. Nothing. I didn't have a single class on sleep. I knew nothing about sleep. Like the average citizen today knows more about sleep than I knew then, because nobody was talking about sleep back then. And the problem with the pharmaceutical industry is like when they apply for a drug patent, they own the research, right? And they give the FDA what they want to give them. They give them all the most favorable studies, and stuff's not so favorable to them, they hide away. But once they get sued, they have to show all of it. And so the Z drugs had recently started to get sued because they're hugely dissociative. And so, they basically take somebody's brain offline to where they can act like they're awake and normal, but they have no memory of it whatsoever. And like people were going out and gambling their life savings away while they thought they were sleeping and waking up the next day with no memory of it. So they got successfully sued. And so I found out, what Ambien could do. Now, like I knew that consequence, but I still didn't know anything about sleep. Now, the benefit I had was being the doctor for the West Coast SEAL teams, and the SEALs already had like the celebrity status. They'd already killed Bin Laden and all that stuff. And so I could call anybody and see somebody's TED talk, read somebody's book, hear somebody lecture, whatever. And I just call them and say, hey, I'm the doctor for the West Coast SEAL teams. Could I come train with you? Could I consult with you? Every single person I talked to was like overwhelmingly generous. And so I got to learn a lot really quickly about sleep. And so once I understood what was going on while you're sleeping, I thought, damn, every single complaint these guys have could be explained by poor sleep. Right. Now, I didn't think it would explain, but it was like, it was possible. Like any symptom could be coming from poor sleep, and specifically, this drug-induced sleep that they were in. And so I came up with a concoction of supplements to help guys get off of Ambien. And when I did, lo and behold, 4 weeks later, 6 weeks later, their total testosterone tripled, their free testosterone quadrupled, their fasting insulin went down 75%. Oxidative markers went way down, inflammatory markers went way down, thyroid function went, like everything balanced out. And I'm not saying it was 100% for everybody, but it was like 80% solution for at least 80% of the guys, but every single person got better. And so I started beating down the leadership door, and said, hey, we got to quit giving people Ambien, and we got to start focusing around sleep. And I remember literally getting laughed out of people's offices when I was telling them that the hormone deficiencies, because it had already been identified that SEALs had this hormone deficiency pattern that nobody understood. And I was like, I think it's coming from lack of sleep. And they literally laughed me out of the office and told me I needed to go back to medical school. And then not too much longer, like once I started getting good results, and especially when like older kind of leadership guys came to my office and I helped them, they became believers. We had these pre and post deployment retreats where we take the whole team before they deployed, and we, spend a weekend at a resort, and we'd bring in guest lecturers and stuff. And Rob Wolf was one of those guys, and Kresser and Dave Grossman, and like kind of all the New York Times bestsellers, the people, podcast people were interested in, and authors people were interested in, they'd bring them in to lecture. And then I was really the only guy talking about sleep, and definitely the only guy talking about sleep as a performance tool. And so like all those guys just were really impressed with what I was teaching. And so they started inviting me onto their podcast and inviting me to do lectures. Rob and I became really good friends. I went on Rob's podcast, and bada bing, overnight, I became the sleep guy. And so while I was trying to enhance performance, and that was one of the tools I was using, like that's what I got dubbed as a sleep guy. And now, as you know, I've done, 400 or 500 podcasts as a sleep guy. I've lectured all over the world as a sleep guy. I've written a book, been on TED Talks, on television, all that stuff for sleep. And so that's what people think of me as. And that's okay. Again, it's a very important message, and I keep harping on that message. But I do all performance, like any kind of performance. So I sleep, exercise, nutrition, stress mitigation, like anything wrapped up in that.
Yeah. That's a wild
That wasn't
ride.
brief, but that was a summary. So
no, it was really good.
I did half of it. Half.
Yeah,
halfway listen.
You got into a lot of the points that I wanted to cover as well. So it's really nice. And I've been taking your sleep remedy, right? And
yep.
So let me back up. Like, I really like it. We'll talk about that. Like the last week that I've been taking the supplements, been really good. I've been sleeping solid. But I feel like we're in a really exciting golden age of consumer education, right? Like all these podcasts that we've named, the Hubermans and Dr. Gabrielle Lyons, and all of these big, like, people are searching out knowledge to be healthier. And I don't know if that's part of the pandemic is maybe people have a slight more tilt towards wellness, right? They really want to investigate that. So it just seems like it's really good timing for all this. And sleep is now, so it's just crazy how, well, me personally, how much I invest in my sleep now, right? I made sleep mattress. I have my Aura ring. I have, I take my supplements. I make sure that, temperature is light, like all of that stuff, because I noticed such a significant difference and I'm not a high performing athlete, right? I'm not. I like to perform at my best every day. I like to get the most out of every day. So it's not, just the high performing athletes and people like you who work with the upper echelon, right? The pro athletes, the Navy SEALs, right? There's so much to learn from those populations that can now kind of, trickle down into the general population. And maybe we could start with this, like, what are the most common misconceptions about sleep that you talk about often with your patients or with people that you converse with?
Well, something just sort of fading when I first started, beating this drum back in 2009. Just convincing people that sleep wasn't a luxury was enough. Like that was kind of the biggest hurdle. We've all heard the axioms. I'll sleep when I'm dead. Sleep is for the weak. Like all that kind of stuff that we said. That's still a part of our culture, but it's much less so. I'm still not going to convince like a Division I athlete who's trying to get a 4.0 in college and go to law school or medical school or something. So I'm not going to convince them to sleep. I'm not going to convince the military to quit sleep depriving their recruits when they're, and I think in the military, I don't think it's true in academia, but I think in the military, sleep deprivation is a tool to kind of expose potential mental disorders, right? Because sleep deprivation kind of triggers any kind of predisposition you have to psychiatric issues will come roaring forward when you're sleep deprived. And almost no psychiatric event ever happens without being preceded by sleep deprivation. So, by and large, I would say society is starting to catch on to the fact that sleep's important. As far as a misconception, I would say, the biggest misconception right now, it's hard to fit in that box, but it's really just that people don't understand how important sleep is. It's like they're starting to get some awareness of it, right? It's like, we put seatbelts in cars for 20 years before we mandated people use a seatbelt. So it's kind of like that, it's like, we know this is a problem, but everybody's just kind of paying attention to it right now. And it's the worst sales pitch in the world as, to try to convince people that sleep is valuable, because sleep impacts everything, like literally everything. And the worst thing that you can say is like, hey, my product does everything. And it does, but it does everything. In fact, when I first started doing my lectures, I used to say there's four pillars of health, right? There's sleep, nutrition, exercise, and stress mitigation.
Yep.
In the last 5-7 years or something, I've backed off of that, and I said there's 3 pillars of health: there's exercise, there's nutrition, and there's stress mitigation. Those sit on the platform of sleep, right? That like the foundation of sleep. And if you don't sleep well, those other pillars are relatively insignificant, right? Anything that you can do to optimize those 3 pillars, if you aren't sleeping well, is simply mitigating the damage that you're doing by not sleeping well. And you're not mitigating it 100%. Like you're reducing how much damage is. There's no growth. Like you're not getting better. I'm sorry. Like you're not getting better if you're sleep deprived, period. You might think you are, but you're not. Like if you just got better sleep, you would be better at whatever you're trying to do. And no matter how hard you're working on that during the day, if you just gave up all your training and said, I'm going to sleep 8 hours a night, you'd be better. You'd be 30-40% better at whatever you're trying to be good at. And so, when I do performance now, obviously, like I started this with, as you alluded to, sort of like the most performant populations in the world, right? Special forces guys and professional athletes, Olympic athletes, whatever. They're the really hard charging kind of people who are all focused on that. But now, like, my private clients are CEOs and entrepreneurs and whatever. It's like it doesn't matter what they wouldn't perform better at. It doesn't. It's just because, like, you want to be a better father, you want to be a better husband. Yeah, you want to improve your body composition, you want to be faster, you want to be stronger, you want to have better concentration, you want to be better at problem solving, you want to be a faster thinker, you want to, it doesn't matter what you want to be good at. Sleep is the foundation. And so when people, like, I always tell people when I lecture, and they say, like, what's the number one recommendation for you have for people to sleep? I say, go to Google Scholar or PubMed or something like, reputable and academic. Not that academia is all reputable anymore, but you know what I mean? The most quantitative places you could go, and put in sleep and whatever you care about, and then just read until you're petrified. And once you're scared to death that you're ruining your life, now you're in the right place, right? And then the other misconception is, people think of it like exercise or fitness or something like that. Whereas, if I'm 50 pounds overweight, so, right, like I've been sleeping poor my whole life and I'm 50 years old, right? And now I'm going to get on top of it. Like, how much is that going to matter? How long is it going to take to really show a difference? Is it maybe going to extend my life a few years? Like, I don't really know. It's not like that. It's not like losing 50 pounds, 1 week of really good sleep after not sleeping really well literally turns the lights on to people. Yeah. Like they come and they're like, oh my God, I didn't realize the world was so full of bright colors. And, there's all this stuff I notice now. And I don't even recognize that guy. And this is 1 week. It's, somebody who's been routinely restricting themselves to 5 to 6 hours of sleep, the whole point of me sleeping tonight is to repair from today and prepare for tomorrow. And ideally, like if I work out today, if I do anything worth doing, I'm going to come out of the gym weaker than I went into the gym, right? When do I get stronger? I get stronger while I sleep. My body and brain uses today as the template to figure out what I need to be better at tomorrow. And ideally, I'll repair myself in a way that tomorrow I'm better able to do what I tried to do today. And if I could go to sleep and repair 100% and prepare, like restock the shelves, replenish all the nutrients, if I could do that 100%, I would never age. I'd wake up exactly the same every day. And if I could edge it out and get a little better every day, I would be reverse aging. Like a little kid goes to sleep, wakes up bigger, faster, stronger, smarter, taller, right? At plateaus around 20 something to 30 something. And then you kind of start going the other way and start waking up 99.9997% or something, right? And so the biggest, this would be my misconception that, like, I feel fine after 6 hours of sleep. All science, like all research, 100% of the research points to it takes 8 hours to recover from being awake for 16 hours. If I just told you it takes 8 hours to repair everything you did to yourself today and to prepare for tomorrow, and you choose to use 6 hours instead of 8, you're choosing to age 25% faster.
Wow. let's talk about your blend. I
Oh,
was
what?
looking the blend of
Okay.
your
Yeah.
supplement. I
Yeah.
was going through it. So I've been kind of piecemealing things together to get a really nice sleep supplement, right? And
Yeah.
I've taken pharmaceuticals in the past. You know, they may get you to sleep, but as you know, they don't really get you in the stages of sleep that you need. And then
Right.
they become kind of a crutch. And, some of my family members have gone in and out of bad situations with Ambien. And it's
Mhm.
just, yeah, I've learned I just stay away from the pharma, right?
Yeah.
Um, and
Shortens your life significantly.
yeah, it's crazy that,
Yeah.
that it gets dished out so quickly.
Yeah.
But you got a lot of stuff. You got vitamin D in here. You got niacin. You got L-tryptophan. You got magnesium. Man, give us some insights. Like, how did you formulate this? This is a pretty comprehensive blend you got here.
Yeah. So, thank you for saying that. That was the intent of it.
Yeah,
It's self-serving, but I always say I believe that's the best product on the market
cool.
because if I could make it better, I would. Like, I'm constantly reading, I'm constantly reading on sleep and new supplements and what people are figuring out. And anytime something that I think will improve the supplement comes out, I add it in there, right? I figure out a way to add it. If like this is going to make sense, then we do it. Um, and so, like you said, I came up with that to get the seals off of Ambien, but they were taking Ambien because they couldn't sleep, obviously, right? So I
Yeah,
couldn't just take away their Ambien and say, suck it up and go to sleep. Like I had to give them something. And so, like I said, I'd learned a lot about sleep physiology. And so I just said, okay, what happens when you sleep? Like what are the neurochemical changes that need to happen for you to sleep? And how can I support those things? That's all I can really do. Like I knew the lifestyle modification, like the behavioral cognitive therapy part of it, sort of the sleep ritualization or sleep hygiene, whatever you want to call it. Like that was a huge component of it. But we had to make sure that people's brains were in a place to sleep. So if you think about evolutionarily, we use the sun, right? To guide our circadian rhythms. Our circadian rhythms are about 15 to 20 minutes off of 24 hours. Males are a little bit longer, females are a little bit shorter, vice versa. I always forget, it doesn't matter.
okay.
But we use the sunlight to, realign us with the sun because we can't see at night and we're right. And so we've been evolving for a long time and it made no sense for us to be out in the dark where we couldn't see. We're already pretty crappy predators unless, we can focus on one animal with our weapon that we've designed. Like mano a mano, we can't beat a raccoon, right? So we tuck away at night, right? So it's like the sun goes down. That's our body's cue, our brain's cue. And there's nerve cells in the back of your eyes that have nothing to do with vision. All they do is sense blue light. My guess is because the sky's blue. Can't prove that, but that's probably it. And so once the blue light goes out of your eyes, that triggers the release of that hormone that everybody knows, melatonin. So melatonin doesn't make you sleep. Melatonin initiates the cascades of changes that after all those cascades go on, like different regions of your brain are becoming more active, different regions are becoming less active. Some are producing more of a certain neurotransmitter, neuropeptide, neurohormone. Like everything shifts. Your brain is actually more active while you're asleep than it is while you're awake. It's just active in different ways. So all these chemical shifts need to happen. One of the first things that happens is a release of GABA, capital GABA, which stands for gamma aminobutyric acid, if you care. And what that does is it slows down the neocortex. So I usually start my lectures off when I lecture a crowd and I say, who here can define sleep for me? Crickets, right? Like nobody can define sleep. I'm like, don't you think that's weird? Like we do that. And I was like, well, hold on. Like, I was presumptive. Who here has slept before? Yeah, and everybody giggles, laughs. And I'm like, don't you think it's weird that you don't like you do something every day and you can't define it? And so the good news is, or the bad news, however you want to interpret it, sleep scientists really can't define it either, right? So like our best, like William Dement came up with, there's a barrier between you and your environment and you can be awakened past it, right? If I hit you in the head with a baseball bat, there's a barrier between you and your environment. You're no longer paying attention to your environment, but I can't wake you up, right? If you drink yourself unconscious, same thing. So you have to be able to be woken up. So all that really means is that the neocortex, that part of our brain that we think of when we think of a human brain that, kind of squiggly, has all little cracks and dents and sulci and it's kind of crescent shaped. That's the part of our brain that really we operate with. There's a lizard brain beneath that that's like the four S, feeding, fighting, fleeing, and fornicating. And that's what happens when you dissociate the neocortex from the lizard brain, is that lizard brain takes over. And that's what was happening with the Ambien. People were taking that, dissociating their brain. Lizard brain was taking over, and they were going thrill seeking. They're picking out prostitutes, eating themselves sick, gambling, taking risky behaviors. And so the neocortex, how we interact with the world, that's what it means. There's a barrier between you and your environment. Just means you aren't paying attention to your environment and you aren't interacting with your environment. So when you're asleep, your eyes and ears and nose and like everything still works. You're just not paying attention to it. And so what GABA does is it lowers the sort of the resting potential. You can think of it like like a mousetrap or something, like it's sprung with some tension and all you need to do is just tap it and it pops. Well, we just tighten that spring down to where it takes a lot more pressure to pop that neuron and make that neuron fire. And that's what GABA does. It lowers the resting potential of all these neurons. So it makes it harder for them to interact or with the environment. And so you aren't smelling. Well, you're smelling and tasting and seeing and feeling and all that, but you just aren't processing it. And then of course that's your motor cortex too. So that's how you move and interact with the world. And then you interpret what you're seeing and smelling and all that. So all that kind of gets shut off in favor of this restorative period, right? This repair and restore. So GABA does that. And then a whole bunch of other cascades keep changing. And it's changing the whole night. Like every sleep stage has different chemical balances in different regions of the brain that are active. And so you can't just do a trick, right? Like pharmaceutical industries do a trick. They say GABA slows down the brain. Well, let's make something that the brain thinks is GABA. It binds the GABA receptor, but it's a whole lot more powerful than GABA. And that's what benzodiazepines were. And benzodiazepines have about 100 times the effect of GABA on a GABA receptor. But benzodiazepines also suppress breathing. So if you go up too high on it, people die from them. And so let's come up with a new drug. So they come up with a new drug that doesn't bind the same receptors, all the same receptors. And so it doesn't repress breathing, but now it has 1,000 times the effect of a GABA molecule. And so when you take a sleep drug and dissociate your brain, you're not sleeping, you're just unconscious. It's like I hit you in the head with a baseball bat. But go back to your question. When we evolved for the blue light to trigger everything, that melatonin comes up pretty quickly, but all of those cascades in your brain that change it, including the GABA and slowing down the brain. And then the other thing that happened, obviously, because there was no HVAC, your body temperature went down. So those are really the three things, right? Decreased blue light initiates everything. GABA slows everything down. Lower body temperature is part of the equation to feel sleepy. So what do you need for that? Well, you need melatonin and you need GABA. Well, I don't want to give you melatonin. Like it's a hormone. So if I give you 100% of what you need, then you quit responding to it or you quit producing it. We don't know exactly the degree to which it slows down, but the receptors go away if there's too much of it in there. And from the time the sun goes down until the time you wake up, you only produce about 6 micrograms of melatonin in your brain over 10 to 12 hour period. So I didn't want to give a ton of that. I just want to put a little bit of GABA in there, or a little bit of melatonin in there. And I actually was giving way too much when I first started. I was giving 1 milligram, which I thought was pretty safe. And then I don't know if you've ever heard of Dan Party, but smart neuroscientist and sleep researcher. He clued me in on that a couple of years into it. Said, "Oh no, you need to bring that way down." So we've all heard of like the Thanksgiving, tryptophan coma, right?
Oh yeah.
Turkey has an amino acid in it called tryptophan. All meat does. Nothing special about turkey. It says we don't tend to overeat other things as much as we do that. And of course, the carbohydrates are loaded in there too, and they're causing part of this. But tryptophan becomes 5-hydroxytryptophan in the brain, and then you need vitamin D3 and magnesium to convert that 5-hydroxytryptophan to serotonin. Serotonin then becomes melatonin. Melatonin, like I said, initiates the cascades. GABA then starts doing its job and slowing down the brain, and your body temperature drops and things slow down, and you start feeling sleepy. Your stress hormones go down. You start feeling sleepy. So all this in my supplement is what I just said, right? It's there's tryptophan in there. There's 5-hydroxic tryptophan in there. There's vitamin D3. There's magnesium. There's a little bit of melatonin to initiate everything. There's GABA. There's an amino acid called L-theanine in there that potentiates the effect of GABA, because it's hard to get GABA across the blood-brain barrier anyway. And so, we put some theanine in there to get, so what we do get across into the brain works better. And then I just recently added phosphatidylserine in there. And I added that because there's a lot of research, and it's primarily around HIIT. So like when you do high intensity interval training, if you take a bunch of phosphatidylserine before you do that, you'll decrease, you'll decrease your stress levels. You'll decrease your stress hormones, which then extends your lactic acid threshold in your VO2 max. And so I wasn't interested in the lactic acid threshold of VO2 max, but I'm like, hey, if this lowers stress hormones, like, let's do that. And so I added that in there. That's kind of touchy because like I've seen people need anywhere from like 50 to 400 milligrams of that. And so because that is really lowering stress hormones, and stress hormones are responsible for you being awake and alert in proportion to your environment. If you're somebody who needs 50, I had, 200 in my product, then you're probably going to wake up feeling terrible. Like if you wake up, like when you should, like you just feel super groggy. And so there's a low dosage in there. But that's something that I haven't really figured out how to do other than just to tell people to buy some phosphatidylserine and experiment with that. If you feel like your sleep isn't sort of optimal on that, I'd say that's the one thing that I would like to have more of, but because the needs vary so much, I just don't. And anyway, I was giving SEALs a worksheet for that, saying, go out and buy all this. And this is pre-Amazon. So they were literally driving to all the health food stores in San Diego and trying to get the right brands and the right quantities. And some were powders and some were liquids and some were capsules and some were 90 days and some were 30 days. And they just kept saying, dude, this is a pain in the butt. Just like make a product for us.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't know how to do that. I'm a doctor. What the hell do I know about making a product? And so Rob and I got together and started talking about it. And Peter T is a good friend of mine too. And so we just all kind of brainstormed. So let's just make our own thing. And then we'll sell it to the military. We'll get a military contract and get it to SOCOM, and and then maybe we'll make a little bit of money or whatever. So anyway, we did that. And we started it up. We launched it at Paleo FX. By the time Paleo FX was over, we were in the black. Like we had already repaid all the capital that we did. Just sold like wildfire. And I was like, all right, well, I'm going to get this off the ground for a year. Then I'm going to go back to clinical practice, install a CEO, and just let it ride. And that's 10 years ago. I'm still running the thing. I still don't have a contract with SOCOM, but the product still sells fairly well, and lots of SOCOM people buy it, and I have a discount code for those guys and all that. But that's the story of the sleep supplement. I know probably way longer than it should have been, but that's the story.
Yeah, it's great. And the only complaint I have about it is that my latency has improved so much that I can't get through my book now. And and I'm reading I'm reading Stranger in a Strange Land, and it's really a page turner, but man, I get like 4 or 5 pages in now, and I'm like, what did I just read? I got to go to bed. So that's it.
Well, that's
man.
That's a good endorsement. It's a good endorsement. and my guess is you probably didn't have sleep problems before, right?
I go in and out.
Okay.
I go in and out.
So Rob and I ended up doing a ton of lectures together. We kind of did this traveling circuit for a few years, and he was over at my house. We were doing a lecture the next day, and he's spending the night. And this is when it was called I don't know if you know this, but we launched it. It was called the Sleep Cocktail.
No, I didn't know.
Like my moniker, Doc Parsley, that comes from the SEAL teams, right? Because in the military, like everybody with medical training is a doc, and so everybody called it Doc Parsley Sleep Cocktail. That's what the SEALs called it. And it was my cocktail of supplements. And so that's what it, and so we're like, all right, that's what we're going to name it. So we named it that. Of course, turned out to be a terrible marketing name. Like a lot of people really thought it was an alcoholic thing, or it was supposed to be mixed with alcohol or whatever. It got banned, like it got blocked by several firewalls for like government and stuff like that. So I'm like, all right, well, so we changed the name. Anyway, it was still called Sleep Cocktail in that time. And he's over at my house, and he's like, hey, where can I get some hot water? Because he's mixing in hot water. And I go, I was like, oh, here. And he's like, I got an extra one. You want one? And, funnily enough, I run out of sleep stuff. I run out of sleep remedy all the time. Of course, I own the company and I can get as much of it. I could fill my house with it if I wanted to. And I run out all the time. And so he's like, hey, you want this one? I got an extra one. And I'm like, no, I'm fine. He's like, are you sure? I mean, Rob, like he's like, kind of just taunting me, playing. I'm like, all right. So I take it that night and I wake up, and I had probably been out for about 2 or 3 months, but I've never really had sleep problems other than I didn't value sleep. And I woke up the next morning and I was like, oh my God, what was I thinking? Like I sleep so much better when I take this. And it's like everything else. Like when you don't work out enough and then you start working out again, you're like, what was I thinking? Like, how did I
Right.
let myself, you feel so amazing when you get back on it. Yeah. So
Well, it's a great product, man. And it's well needed. And I think people within our industry too should check it out. I mean, I'm sure you have, affiliate deals and things like that that you can do. And I want to shift a little bit here too, Kirk, because probably got about like 15 minutes, but psychedelics. That's something that
yeah,
I don't get to talk about very often. And I know with your with the high performers that you work with, you found a lot of success, traumatic brain injuries and things like that.
right.
But maybe give us, it's a huge topic. I'd love to get you back on and maybe we can dive a little bit deeper, but, give us
Yeah.
maybe the overview of like how you see the value in psychedelics. And you may, obviously there's a ton of misconceptions about it. There's a
Mm.
lot of faux pas, right? And for so many different reasons, but it's starting to creep back into the mainstream. And it's really
Right.
exciting to me.
Yeah.
So give us, a little bit of your insights and how you see that evolving and why it's
Yeah.
it's so critical to you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think you're right. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of good research going on. I'm I'm uh, I'm pretty closely tied to a lot of that research. Like, I'm not a researcher, but I've kind of been involved with this movement as far as the military goes for a while. And actually, you know, I think it helps when I tell the audiences, like I'm a very straight laced kind of conservative traditional dude. I'm somebody who's always going to find the answer. Like I'm not going to limit my options by following algorithms and stuff. Like I'm going to find the answer. But I've definitely been socialized in certain things, and I thought, like what most people think is that psychedelics is a bunch of hippie woo woo crap that people,
Right.
it's just an
Right.
excuse for people to get high on another kind of drug and call it, spiritual instead of getting high. That's what I really always thought of it. And I'll give you a super, super short version of a really fascinating but long story. I had a SEAL come see me all the time. So back up a second. I told you that the sleep improvement was about 80% solution for about 80% of the guys. The missing component was the TBI, right? We had
Mhm.
and I figured that out about a year before I got out. So it took me a couple of years to kind of tee up on that. And a whole nother story, like TBIs are hugely, hugely common, and way, way more than people think. And that's a whole nother discussion. But you can, like, every SEAL that I know has thousands of TBIs. That's that severe. And the difference between SEALs and other military forces is how much money they have to spend. And so how many exposures to explosions and bullets and stuff they have. So the upper echelon of the specialization of military has more TBIs than the guys who have sort of bigger organizations and less money. But anyway, I had a SEAL who was getting med boarded out, and he was a very dark, intimidating, scary guy. And he came in my office every day, brooding and complaining. And I literally was afraid of him. Like I literally, at any time in my career, I really thought this guy might just come in and murder suicide one day, and and not necessarily to choose me for any reason, but like I was the only guy he really talked to.
Yeah.
Uh, he was so disgruntled, and he just came in my office and complained all day, every day. And it lasted about 6 months, and he got med boarded out. And then I didn't see him for about 6 months. And then I'm at a fundraiser in San Diego, and this guy comes and sits across the table from me and starts talking to me. And I'm the doctor for 3,000 guys, so a lot of times it takes me a little bit to figure out who people are. But he's talking to me as though he knows me very, very clearly. He knows me. And I'm trying to figure out how I know him and trying to figure it out and trying to figure it out. And finally he says something and it hits me. And he's like, "Who do you think I was?" I'm like, "I don't know. I still don't think you're that guy, right? Like you don't even look like the same person to me. Like, what in the hell happened? What did you do?" And he tells me that he got out of the military. You know, he'd been treated for his TBI. He'd been blown up and broken neck and like had all sorts of issues. And so he'd been treated for these, you know, with every kind of psychiatric drug you can imagine. And he gets out and he throws them all in the trash can and gets on a plane and flies to Peru. And he lives in the jungle for some reason nude. I just don't understand that part, but lives nude in the jungle for a month with a shaman and does ayahuasca every third day and does Kundalini yoga all day, every day, basically, and lives off the land.
Wow.
And
Wow.
completely transformed man. He's now the producer of the two biggest video games in the country, maybe in the world. I don't know. Super successful, like completely transformed man, 50 pounds lighter. Again, facial expression, intonation, eye contact, everything about him is different than it was when he was in my office. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll entertain that. And again, really, really short story. I mean, it's a really long story, but I'll make it super succinct. Is my best friend in the world and a guy I'd known since I was 18. We went through SEAL training together, and we were roommates all through Buds. He became suicidal, and as a last resort, I had nothing to offer him. Like same thing, he had been through years and years of traditional Western care. He was floridly suicidal. There's nothing I could do to talk him out of it. And I was like, "Hey, there's this psychedelic thing down in Mexico that might help. You know, it's kind of dangerous. Some people have died doing it, but if you're going to kill yourself anyway, you know, what do you say we try this?" And so he goes down there, has an amazing transformation in front of my eyes. I went down there with him and I watched it, and like he became the 18-year-old I knew. Like that, the next day I'm talking to a guy who looks 30 years younger. I'm like, what in the hell just happened? And so I was a believer from then on. And I was like, okay, well, I'm really going to start learning about this now. And so that was my introduction to it. And, you know, those are severe cases. And for, you know, when you're dealing with people with severe PTSD, TBI, years and years of trauma, darkness, ugliness, poor sleep on top of bad diet, alcohol, drug addictions, whatever, you need some pretty severe, hard-hitting things like ibogaine. Ibogaine's you know, it's considered the father of psychedelic medicine. It's the most harsh teacher. And then there's ayahuasca, which is considered the mother, and then psilocybin, I don't know, is maybe considered the child or something. It's like they all kind of have similar effects. We know that they sort of scrub neurotransmitters, reset a lot of neurological pathways. It increases neuroplasticity. It increases growth factors in your brain. Neuroplasticity really just means that you're capable of thinking a different way than you currently think. I don't know if you've ever heard of the default mode network, but it's kind of like your grumpy old man pathway. So like you grow up believing certain things, and certain things are supposed to be done a certain way, and you say certain things in certain situations, you act this way. Like, you know, all of our cultural stuff, like we have beliefs that are so deep rooted in us, we don't even know they're beliefs. We just think they're you know, innate behaviors. And that's called the default mode network. And essentially your brain's trying to save energy by not thinking and just doing all of these things automatically. And then that's what makes you a grumpy old man, right? So it's like, I'm not a grumpy old man because I'm 53. I'm grumpy old man because my brain pathways are like set. And you know, having purple hair and nose rings ain't how you do it, man. Like that's not one of the pathways. And so like I don't want to see that, you know. And but what psychedelics do is they increase neuroplasticity more like a child. So you have regions of your brain that communicate, that haven't communicated maybe ever, but definitely since you were very young, like an infant. And it allows you neurotropic growth factors. So with TBIs, there's a lot of sort of neuronal death and chronic inflammation and neurons that aren't firing well and working well. A lot of senescent cells that helps clear all of that out, increases blood vessel growth. So increases blood supply to the brain, decreases neuroinflammation. And even if you've never had any type of head injury or any kind of blast injury or TBI, you still have like set pathways, right? That like you have a default mode network. And if that default mode network is driving you towards a life that you don't really want, it's really hard to get out of that, right? So it's like, a lot of people with depressive behaviors, like major depressive disorders, most of that stuff has been, that's been adding up a sort of a negative outlook for years, if not decades. And now how are you going to change? Like you got this super highway and there's this rabbit trail that leads to a better way of learning or behaving, but you're going to follow that super highway because, man, that's the way you know how to do it. And so it does that. And then it also gets rid of the ego. So a lot of the reason we don't change is because it hurts our ego to change, right? Because we're admitting that we're wrong. If we have to change, it's like, well, what I've been doing all this time is wrong. And so I need to be better and I need to change this behavior. That's a big, big step. It's even a bigger step to like figure out how to change it. Like that's not easy, right? That's what I do with my clients over the course of a year. It takes me to get them to change simple things like how they eat and how they sleep. Like not complex things like how they respond to stress and how they respond in relationships and they're the most intimate fears and foibles of, like all that stuff is hard to change. And the psychedelics help a lot with that. You've probably heard of the amygdala in the brain. So that's like the alarm system, the two walnuts on each side of our brain. And what that does basically, that's kind of the master of the sympathetic nervous system. There's the autonomics, there's parasympathetic and sympathetic is kind of the fight or flight pathway. Autonomics is the rest and digest, oversimplification, but it works for this. So the more sort of what we call sympathetic tone. So it's just like how revved up is that amygdala? Like how vigilant is it looking for how vigilant is it looking for stressors or threats, whatever, right? Because the environment doesn't have to change for your perception of the environment to change. And so when you're under a lot of sympathetic tone, this is the hypervigilance that comes from combat, which is a part of what we consider PTSD. People just looking around for threats all the time and finding things threatening all the time. And again, you don't have to be a combat veteran to have that. Like this is the stress response for people who've gone through child abuse or molestation or rape or just a really, nasty relationship with a boss or a family member or something like that. Like these things that kind of trigger you to where you engage in behaviors that are automatic and it doesn't really suit you and you can kind of see it not really working out for you, but you can't stop yourself from doing it. Those are behaviors beyond your control. Those are triggers. And the amygdala, by and large, is charging that. When the amygdala says this is a stressor, that means you need to react. Well, in our modern day and age, with all of our constant influx of negative information that comes all the time, right? There's so many different channels, and you're just bombarded by stimuli and primarily negative things telling you that you aren't good enough, you aren't working hard enough, you haven't succeeded enough, whatever it is. And that revs up our sympathetic nervous system. And the main reason people can't sleep well is their stress hormones are too high. And when the sympathetics are high, stress hormones are high. That's the response of the sympathetic nervous system. Sure. It stimulates the release of stress hormones. When you take, so Ibogaine specifically, now all the psychedelics do this, and they primarily do it through what's called a DMT pathways, DMT receptors. So Ibogaine decreases the sympathetic tone. So it decreases the activity of the amygdala by 90% for up to 9 months after doing one treatment. And it increases all these growth factors. So you can grow new neurons and you can grow new synapses. It completely removes your ego while you're doing your psychedelic experience. Your ego is gone. You're watching yourself from a third person perspective, reviewing your life and going, oh, that was dumb. Well, I shouldn't do that. I should do this. But you weren't even able to see that before because your ego is protective of it. Now you can see all these pathways, all these things about yourself that you could change that would improve your life. You have the neurological situation to be able to do it because you have all this neuroplasticity and increased growth capacities. You're able to change your brain much easier. And then you also have lower stress hormones, and stress hormones interfere with our cognition and our willpower and our mental outlook on life and stuff like that. So that's kind of like the overall basics of them. You know, ibogaine lasts the longest and is the most robust, I would say, effect. Ayahuasca is probably next. Psilocybin is probably next after that. There's again, they're all working off of this DMT pathways, dimethyltryptamine pathway, which our brain ordinarily secretes, and we think that's responsible for the God experience of near death experiences.
Yeah.
Your brain faces DMT, and you go to the light and you feel God and sort of all this other stuff. So, you know, I don't get involved with people's religious beliefs or not, but like it's going to push you towards whatever. Everybody has some sort of spiritual belief, right? Like you have, even if your trust is in science, like that's a belief system, right? Everybody has a belief system. So it's going to expose you to your preferred belief system in a way that's going to allow you the most self-reflection, and it's going to put you in a position to be able to change it. And then, you know, MDMA and ketamine kind of fall into those. Those are man-made versions. LSD was a man-made version. LSD is not really on the radar right now, but you know, MDMA and ketamine's legal already. You can go get ketamine treatments in clinics. A lot of the same benefits. It just doesn't last as long. It's not as robust, and it doesn't last as long. MDMA, same thing. Not as robust, doesn't last as long, and slightly different. You know, effects, but that's the general. And I'm sorry I went on so long, but I was just trying to give a good outline. You can ask any questions from there.
No, that's great, man. It really is. I mean, I think that's probably one of the best, 15-minute overviews on psychedelics I've ever heard.
Well,
And,
thank you.
I'm not naive to psychedelics. I'm a big believer in them. I've had good friends who have actually been on the show who have had TBIs and gone, I don't know
Right.
where it was, either Jamaica or something like that. So that's the last question I have for you, because, I know you probably got to get going, but accessibility for this stuff is like the biggest thing. It's like there's probably
Yeah.
many people listening to this show who are like, okay, whatever Kirk just said, I want that,
Yeah.
right? But how do we get to
Yeah.
it? And I know you have someone in Austin that you wanted to mention that's starting to do
Yeah.
some work
Yeah.
there, but like, yeah, give us a couple places where people can start.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's I don't know if it's all 50 states. I think it is. But it's if it's not, it's really close to all 50 states. If you live, you know, in a fairly metropolitan area, you should probably be able to find a ketamine clinic.
Yep.
My clinical experience with that is I much prefer an IV. You can get it done intramuscularly. You can get an IV done. An IV you can turn off, right? You start having kind of a bad experience, you can just turn it off, and 2 or 3 minutes later, you're back down to normal. And intramuscular is no such luck. Like you're strapped in for the ride once you do the intramuscular. So that I think is a good starting point if you're just thinking about whether or not you think it would be useful to you. I would highly recommend looking for a place that actually has some sort of facilitation, somebody helping you, guiding you, talking to you through those experiences, and not just we're going to, you know, inject you and leave you in a room for an hour or 2 hours or whatever. So I would, that's a good way to start it. Like I said, legal everywhere. MDMA counseling is available. So if there's, it's called MAPS program. You can look into that. You can go into certain clinical settings and you can take MDMA and try to break through things that maybe you're resisting opening up to. So that's sort of the conservative banal. Banal is not the right word, but you know what I mean. Sort of the more conservative approach. You know, ibogaine can only be done outside of the country. Ayahuasca, I think, is slippery from state to state. You know, because there is a large group of religious there's a large religious organization that uses ayahuasca as sort of their sacrament, and so that is allowed here and there around the country. I don't know the details of that. And then psilocybin is actually legal or decriminalized in a couple of states, which is an easier way to go about it. But again, anybody who's going to do any of these, anybody who's interested in all of this stuff, I've been through all of them just to see what they were and what was going on with them, and you know, sort of done my own research on them. And I've worked with hundreds of people who've been through them now. I can't overemphasize like how important the set and setting is. So
Hmm.
the environment that you're in and the mental state that you're in when you do these experiences matter more than the drug. And if you take these, entheogen, psychedelics, whatever you want to call them, plant medicines that comes up done. If you take these psychedelic uh, uh, chemicals, that you're going to have a psychedelic experience. And if you aren't ready for it, it could be a really bad experience. And if you don't have anybody facilitating you, it could be a really long, really bad experience. And it can, it can make things worse for you. So I highly recommend looking for practitioners who do an overall complete program. And like yeah, you alluded to earlier, there's a guy out here in Texas now I know doing this. Justin Lepre is his name, and his organization is Heroic Path to Light. He's he formed it for military veterans and first responders, but he has a very robust program where like there's 6 weeks of sort of preparation. There's the retreat, and then there's multiple weeks of integration afterwards. Something like that. If you don't do that program, like something like that, where you have lots of information about what you're getting into and what it's going to be like and how to get yourself out of bad situations and when to ask for help and all that stuff. And then, go through that experience. And then, the biggest problem, and I've seen this with the special forces guys over and over again, if you don't do anything with that experience and you just ride off of the good feeling that you got from it, right? And to be clear, it's very rarely like a super pleasant experience. It's
Right.
after the fact, you're like, oh, that was really good for me. It's like a
Yeah.
really hard workout. They suck, right? They
Yeah.
hurt.
Yeah.
But like afterwards, like, oh, I'm so glad I did that, right? And so if you don't do anything to sort of integrate that work, and like I said, work on that default mode network and work on how you're thinking and work on your introspection, if you don't do anything with it, as soon as that, amygdala tone and neurotrend, the neurotropic factors, as soon as those go away, your benefits go away because you haven't made any changes and you're just going to kind of snap back to where you were. So it's important to have a really long, robust program, or at least, have somebody that you can work with who's somewhat knowledgeable about this afterwards, and you do your own work of journaling and reading and meditation and prayer and movement, whatever it is that you figure out you need to do. But that would be my recommendation for my I'm really hopeful for the Heroic Path to Light. Just because I think it's preferential. Well, for me, it's definitely preferential that like all of my SEAL patients buddies go through something in the United States with people that I trust and know, and
Yeah.
first world experience and safety precautions and all that other stuff. I feel a lot better about that. There's another side of it where it's just very, I don't mean it derogatory, but I don't know another way of saying it, like very woo woo, very spiritual kind of like, and if you're into that, like, there's components of that in Heroic Path to Light too. They have a lot of female facilitators who do that kind of stuff. And if you're much more drawn to that, that's fine, but you still need your preparation and your work afterwards. Whether you're handling it from the right brain or the left brain afterwards doesn't really matter, as long as you're doing the work that needs to be done.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Kirk, this has been super informative, man. I really appreciate it. And there's plenty of things that I'm going to sit on and think about, and probably
All
reach out
right.
to your friend in Austin. So
Yeah, cool.
really appreciate you coming on. There's people want to find you. It's not hard. You're just
Yeah.
search your name and you'll find tons of stuff on you. So
Yep.
thank you for joining me today. Love to have you back
Yeah.
on next year. And yeah, ladies and gentlemen,
Yeah.
Dr. Kirk Parsley.
We can talk about anything, man.
Cool.
Next year we do, you name it. We do more psychedelics, do peptides, whatever you want to do.
Awesome. Thank you,
Yeah.
sir.
Cool. Thank you.